The elevator moaned as it descended into the belly of Sector D, but I barely noticed anymore. After years in this job, the sound had blended into the white noise of my life, another monotonous detail in a routine defined by hazard zones and bureaucratic silence. I focused instead on the greenish glow of the telemetry data projected inside my helmet. Oxygen levels steady, suit integrity at 100%, decontaminant tanks full. Everything was working perfectly for now. That was always the case at the start. It was the endings that got messy. Area 51 wasn't what people thought it was. No flying saucers or alien interrogation rooms, just endless corridors filled with labs, containment cells and storage bays. A machine for science with no off switch. It existed for one reason: to push boundaries. But the thing about boundaries is they don't stay put. You cross one and another appears, always a little further out, always tempting. That's where we came in, the Mop Brigade. When the bleeding edge research crossed a line it couldn't uncross, we were called to clean up the mess. Sometimes it was radioactive, sometimes biological, sometimes things that didn't fit into any textbook. The incident reports never captured the full horror, though. They couldn't. Some things didn't translate into words. The elevator jerked to a halt, and the doors opened. The light from our helmet beams swept across the corridor ahead, revealing smooth walls, polished floors, and a faint mist clinging to the vents. The air here was filtered to within an inch of its life, a necessity in the deeper levels where containment failures were just another Tuesday. That mist wasn't water vapor, though. It was part of the air scrubbers working overtime. My HUD flagged it as harmless, but I didn't trust the machine's optimism. I adjusted my respirator settings anyway, dialing the filtration system up a notch. The crew shuffled out of the elevator in practiced formation, boots clanking against the floor. Reggie Phelps, grit to anyone who knew him, was first, his incinerator cannon slung across his chest like it was just another extension of his body. He gave a low grunt of acknowledgement as he surveyed the corridor. "Looks clean enough," he muttered. "Clean's a relative term," I replied, scanning the area myself. "Wait till we hit the hot zone." Behind him, Adam Torres, our data analyst, was already fidgeting with one of the scouting drones. The kid had joined the team less than a year ago, and his enthusiasm still hadn't been scrubbed away. "I'm getting partial telemetry from the drones we sent ahead," he said, his voice tinny through the comms. "Signals degraded, but they're still operational." "Good. Keep them moving," I said. Adam nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was in response to my order or his own thoughts. Jack Connolly, our engineer, leaned against the wall, his decontaminant sprayer at the ready. "Place feels too quiet," he muttered, his New England drawl making the words sound heavier than they were. "Usually there's at least some residual noise from the labs, HVAC systems, power lines, something." "It's Sector D," I said. "Nothing down here runs unless it has to. Energy priorities." "Sure, but it still feels off." He trailed off, shaking his head. Marcus Harlan, already strapped into his exosuit, lumbered out last. The suit's servos whined as he adjusted to the confined space. It made him look twice as large as the rest of us, like a mechanized tank in human form. "Herc feels twitchy," he said, patting the exosuit's frame. "Sensors are reading inconsistent pressure in the floor plates." "It's a sub-level," Jack shot back. "Pressure shifts all the time." "Yeah, but usually not this much," Marcus said. He glanced at me. "You want me to hold back?" I shook my head. "Stick with us. If the floor decides to drop out, you're our insurance policy." The corridor ahead stretched into infinity, segmented by thick doors marked with black and yellow hazard stripes. My HUD tagged each one with a code as we passed. Lab 17, Storage 12, and so on. None of them mattered. Our destination was further down, past the zones marked as safe. Not that the designation meant much. In a place like this, safety was just a word they slapped onto doors that hadn't been breached yet. As we walked, I ran through the details we'd been given, though it didn't take long. The briefing had been one of the vaguest I'd ever seen. Bioorganic anomaly, Sector D, Sub-Level 7. No specifics on what the anomaly was or how it got loose. No casualty list, though the absence of it wasn't reassuring. Protocol dictated that casualties were reported when recoverable. If the incident involved something that didn't leave remains, the field just stayed blank. "Anyone else think it's weird we didn't get a proper report?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. "Not the first time," Reggie said. "Last year, Sector C, we walked into a damn nanite storm with nothing but a 3-line memo." "Yeah, and half the team ended up in medical," Jack shot back. "You'd think they'd learn." "They don't care," I said. "They just want the mess cleaned up." The corridor ended at a bulkhead door, its surface pitted with scorch marks. Not a good sign. I approached, running my gloved hand over the control panel. The screen flashed, then displayed a single word. "Deactivated." "Manual override?" Reggie asked. "Looks like it," I said, pulling the compact fusion cutter from my belt. The tool powered up, a glowing nozzle at its tip radiating intense heat. The cutter wasn't just for doors. It was designed to slice through anything, organic or inorganic, using a jet of superheated plasma. I pressed it to the door seam, and a bright arc flared to life, hissing as it vaporized the alloy in its path. My helmet's environmental sensors flagged elevated particulates in the air, and I noted a faint spike in the heat signature bleeding through the metal. Molten droplets spattered onto the floor, cooling into dull, misshapen clumps. Behind me, Adam spoke up. "Telemetry from the drones just cut out completely." "All of them?" "Yeah. Last thing they transmitted was... I don't even know what it was. Some kind of organic mass on the walls, but it was moving." "Great," Jack muttered. "Mass on the walls, moving. That's new." The door finally gave way, the melted edges glowing as it collapsed inward. Beyond it was another corridor, but this one was different. The walls weren't clean metal anymore. They were coated in something slick and semi-solid, a substance that reflected the light of our helmet beams. It shifted as we stepped inside, not like a liquid, but more like muscle fibers contracting beneath skin. My HUD flagged it as unknown biomaterial. "Looks like the drones weren't exaggerating," I said. "Anyone else's skin crawling, or is that just me?" Marcus asked. "Just you," Jack said, though his tone suggested otherwise. We moved cautiously, the sound of our footsteps dulled by the organic coating that clung to the floor like a living carpet. My helmet lights traced streaks of movement across the substance as if it rippled in response to our intrusion. The others moved in tight formation behind me, their lights carving overlapping beams into the gloom ahead. The faint squelching sound beneath our boots was unnervingly wet, yet nothing about the material flagged as liquid. It was dense, elastic, more like the outer layer of something alive. I focused on each step, keeping my balance steady. Anything that could breach the floor plating of a secure sublevel this deep wouldn't care about my footing, but slipping here wasn't an option. Then we found the bodies. They were fused into the walls, or at least what was left of them. Skeletal frames encased in translucent material, their features warped. One of them still wore a lab coat, the fabric partially absorbed into the substance. The sight should have made me sick, but it didn't. I'd seen worse. What caught my attention was the way the material moved around them, as if it was still feeding. "Looks like it got hungry," Reggie said, his voice as flat as ever. "Stay sharp," I said. "Whatever did this might still be here." "Not might," Adam said. "Definitely." He pointed to a spot further down the corridor where the material was moving, not subtly but in full rippling waves. It was heading toward us. I raised my hand, signaling the crew to hold position. "Reggie, you're up." He nodded and stepped forward, hoisting the incinerator cannon. The device roared, spewing a jet of flame across the corridor. The organic material recoiled instantly, shrinking back from the heat. For a moment it seemed like we had the upper hand. Then the material split, fragments breaking off and darting toward us in separate directions. The corridor erupted into chaos as the crew engaged. Decontaminant foam sprayed across the walls, incinerator bursts lighting up the air and the crackle of the fusion cutter cutting through stray masses. Through it all, I kept my eyes on the HUD, watching the telemetry data for any signs of system failure. The suit was holding, for now. As the organic fragments retreated further into the corridor, I signaled the team to hold. "Everyone good?" I asked. "Define good," Jack said. I ignored him and turned to Adam. "Any updates from the system?" He shook his head. "No, but there's something else. The growth patterns. It's targeting structural weak points." "Trying to bring the place down?" Marcus asked. "More like trying to reshape it," Adam said. "I think it's using the facility to grow itself." I stared down the corridor, where the organic material had retreated into the shadows. This wasn't just a cleanup. This was something else entirely. And we were just getting started. The air was getting harder to breathe. My respirator filtered the contaminated atmosphere as my suit worked to stabilize the balance. Inside the sealed system, we had an internal oxygen supply. Enough for a few hours if things stayed under control. But protocol dictated we conserve it whenever possible. The respirator pulled in external air, running it through layers of filtration before routing it into the suit. Normally, it was efficient. Here it was struggling. My HUD showed fluctuating readings for particulate density, strange spikes and surges that suggested the air wasn't just dirty, it was reacting, as though it were alive and resisting analysis. I switched to full internal oxygen, a move that would buy me cleaner air, but cut into reserves. The hiss of the system adjusting was barely audible, and the air quality inside my helmet instantly improved. It wasn't just the physical discomfort that had me on edge. It was the sense that everything around us was responding to our presence in ways I couldn't explain yet. That made my skin crawl in a way years of gore and chaos never had. We moved deeper into the corridor, following the organic material as it retreated, leaving behind slick trails that glistened in the harsh light of our helmet beams. The walls and floor looked less like solid structures and more like raw anatomy, muscles and tendons stretched over some unseen skeleton. It was warm to the touch, one of the worst discoveries Jack made when he braced a gloved hand against the wall to steady himself. "Christ," he muttered, shaking his hand as if the heat might linger. "It's like touching a fever. What the hell is this stuff even made of?" "Don't think about it too hard," I said. "Just keep moving." Marcus lumbered behind us, his exosuit straining as he adjusted to the uneven terrain. He stopped at intervals to scan the area with the suit's integrated sensors, reporting the same anomalies over and over, shifting density, pressure inconsistencies, and electromagnetic surges. He didn't have to say it for us to know what it meant. The anomaly wasn't just occupying the space. It was changing it, assimilating the facility into itself. Ahead, Adam was glued to his handheld console, his eyes darting between the screen and the environment. "I'm picking up something big, about 50 meters ahead," he said. "It's not moving, but the readings are weird. High thermal output like it's generating heat." "Could be the core," I said. "Let's check it out." Reggie moved to the front, his incinerator cannon ready. The rest of us followed, stepping carefully to avoid the more unstable-looking sections of the floor. The organic material had grown thicker here, rising in jagged, root-like formations that crunched underfoot. Each step felt like walking on the brittle bones of something that should have stayed buried. We reached an intersection where the corridor opened into a wider chamber, the ceiling arching high above us in a way that didn't match the architectural design of the lower levels. It wasn't supposed to be this open. Sector D's sub-levels were built for function, not aesthetics. But the anomaly had reshaped it, hollowing out sections and reinforcing others with its grotesque growths. At the center of the chamber was the source of the heat Adam had detected, a mass of translucent material, about the size of a small car, with veins of shiny liquid coursing through it. The light cast harsh reflections across the walls, refracting into distorted patterns that made the space feel even more alien. "It's feeding," Adam whispered, pointing to the base of the mass. Parts of machinery and human remains were partially embedded in it. Some of the pieces were still recognizable, an arm here, a piece of a control panel there, but they were fused together as if melted and molded into a single entity. "That's the research team," Jack said. "What's left of them?" Reggie didn't wait for further discussion. He aimed the incinerator cannon at the mass and fired, sending a jet of flame roaring across the chamber. The organic material reacted immediately, contracting as the fire consumed it. The mass fragmented into dozens of smaller, semi-liquid shapes that darted across the floor and walls. Each one moved with its own purpose, as if fragments of the larger entity had been given independent minds. That thought didn't sit right with me. Fragments felt too mechanical for what these things were. Spawns, that's what they looked like. Living offshoots of the original mass, with the same hunger and malice driving them. I decided then and there that was the only word that fit. "Pull back," I ordered, raising my fusion cutter. The blade flared to life, cutting through the nearest spawn as it came at me. The material hissed and dissolved under the intense heat, but more were already closing in. Jack and Marcus moved to cover our retreat, Jack spraying decontaminant foam in wide arcs while Marcus used the exosuit's bulk to block the spawn's advance. The foam worked well enough for a few seconds, forcing them to recoil, but the anomaly adapted quickly. It began absorbing the foam, metabolizing it into new growths that spread even faster. The team retreated in tight formation, keeping the anomaly at bay with bursts of flame and foam. Adam stumbled as one of the spawns darted at his legs, but Reggie was there to incinerate it before it could latch on. We made it back to the corridor, sealing the bulkhead door behind us. For now, the anomaly was contained in the chamber, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. "That was a bad idea," Jack said, leaning against the wall to catch his breath. "Whatever this thing is, fire just makes it angry." "Not fire," Adam corrected. "Heat. It's reacting to the energy. I think it's using the thermal output to accelerate its growth." "Fantastic," Reggie muttered. "So, what the hell do we do now?" The anomaly wasn't a mindless predator. It was intelligent, or at least programmed with some kind of adaptive behavior. It was feeding, growing, and spreading, and it was doing so with purpose. That was the most unsettling part. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. "Adam," I said finally, "can you access the research logs from here? I need to know what they were working on." "I can try," he said, pulling out his console. "The systems are... damn. The anomaly's interference is messing with the connection, but I think I can get a partial download. Give me a minute." While he worked, the rest of us checked our equipment. My decontaminant reserves were half empty, and the fusion cutter's power cell was already running low. Reggie's cannon was still operational, but the heatsink was nearing its limit. We weren't equipped for a prolonged engagement. If this thing got out of Sector D, we'd have no way to stop it. Adam finally spoke up, his voice tense. "Got it. Most of it's corrupted, but there's enough here to get an idea of what happened." "Talk to me," I said. "The project was codenamed Helios Bionet," he said. "They were using alien DNA to create a synthetic organism capable of adaptive evolution. The idea was to build something that could survive in any environment, metabolize any resource, and repair itself indefinitely." "Why the hell would they do that?" Marcus asked. "Bioweapons," Jack said bitterly. "That's what this place is really about, isn't it? Not science, just better ways to kill people." Adam nodded grimly. "The logs mentioned something about a failsafe mechanism, but it's incomplete. They were trying to figure out how to shut it down if it got out of control, but, well, you've seen the results." "So there's no way to stop it?" "There might be," Adam said. "The logs mention a countermeasure, a containment protocol, but it's incomplete. Without the right equipment or detailed access codes, it's a dead end." "Great," Jack said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "So, the failsafe is just a suggestion? Fantastic planning." "It's not just about us," I cut in. If this thing gets out of Sector D, it won't stop here. It'll adapt, spread, and by the time it reaches the surface, everything up top will already be behind the curve. We've seen what it can do, we've got to find a way to stop it, and that means playing smart. The team fell silent, the weight of what that meant settling on all of us. Knowing the risks was one thing. Facing them with no clear plan was another. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "Then we pull back," he said firmly. "We regroup, get what we need, and come back with better tools. This thing's tough, but it's not unkillable." Adam looked up from his console, nodding. "The mainframe upstairs will have full project logs. That'll tell us what this thing was built to withstand, and what it wasn't. And there's experimental containment tech in the upper-level equipment bay, stuff they didn't issue for this mission." The thought of leaving didn't sit well. My instincts told me the anomaly wasn't going to give us a free pass, and part of me wanted to finish the fight here and now. But I knew better. This wasn't a fight we could win on guts alone. If we were going to face it again, we'd be ready. "Move out," I said. The elevator ride back to the surface was silent. Even with the seal holding steady, I felt dirty, like the anomaly had seeped into places no machine could clean. I glanced at the telemetry on my HUD, watching the status of my oxygen reserves and particulate filters. All green, but it didn't make me feel better. Numbers didn't account for gut instinct, and mine told me we were just barely scraping by. Adam fidgeted in the corner of the elevator, his hands jittering over his handheld console. He kept glancing at the screens as if the anomaly might follow us up. Marcus stood like a statue in his exosuit, his arms crossed. Jack muttered curses, wiping down his gear with a rag that was already stained black with whatever gunk he'd picked up in the hot zone. Reggie, as usual, said nothing. His grip on the incinerator cannon relaxed, but ready. The man never let his guard down, even when there was nothing left to guard against. We stepped off the elevator into the containment bay, where the decontamination process kicked into overdrive. Automated arms sprayed us with layers of mist and foam, each pass stripping away more of the residue clinging to our suits. When the process ended, vents roared to life, blasting us with air so cold it felt like stepping into an Arctic wind. I unsealed my helmet once the system cleared us, taking in a breath of filtered, processed air. It didn't feel much better, but at least it didn't have that wet, acrid taste of the anomaly. Jack pulled off his helmet and sniffed the air like he was testing it for poison. "Smells like burnt ozone," he said. "Better than whatever the hell was down there." "Focus," I said. "Adam, we need those logs. Figure out what this thing is vulnerable to." Adam nodded, already moving toward the terminal. The kid was quick when he needed to be. He connected his console to the facility's network. "Working on it," he said, his voice tight. "Just give me a minute." While he worked, the rest of us began stripping out of our suits, swapping out damaged components for fresh replacements. My gloves were pitted with tiny holes where the anomaly's corrosive material had eaten through the outer layer. Marcus's exosuit had fared better, though I noticed scorch marks along the joints where the spawns had tried to rip him apart. Adam spoke up after a few minutes, his voice cutting through the silence. "Got something. The anomaly's codename is Helios Bionet. It's basically a synthetic organism designed to adapt to hostile environments. Alien DNA spliced with synthetic biomatter. It can metabolize almost anything, organic or inorganic, and use it to grow." "Yeah, we got that part already," Jack said. "What's it weak against?" Adam scrolled through the logs. "It's vulnerable to resonant energy disruption. Low-frequency pulses disrupt its cellular structure, forcing it to collapse temporarily. But the energy has to be sustained to have any lasting effect. Heat works to some degree, but it accelerates its growth if you're not careful. There's also a compound, listed as BN13, that neutralizes its metabolic functions, but it's still in experimental stages." "Experimental or not, we're using it," I said. "What about weapons?" "There's a list of higher clearance equipment in the upper-level armory," Adam said. "Stuff we didn't get issued for this mission. Containment-grade gear designed for level 5 anomalies." I left the team to finish their gear checks and headed to the command console. The line to Central Ops was secure, but that didn't make the conversation any easier. The officer on the other end of the line looked as detached as ever. I laid out the situation in the bluntest terms possible. The anomaly was spreading faster than we could counter it, and our current loadout wasn't cutting it. He didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge the lives lost in Sector D. "Your job is containment," he said, as if I didn't already know that. "Do what's necessary, but you'll be accountable for any resource overages." I almost laughed at the word overages. They were worried about budgets while we were fighting a monster that could eat their entire facility. "Then give us what we need," I said. "The good stuff. High-clearance containment weapons, experimental compounds, whatever you've got." The officer hesitated, but only for a moment. "Authorization granted. Check the upper-level armory. You'll find what you need there." I cut the connection before he could say anything else. The armory was full of reinforced lockers. Each one held a piece of equipment more advanced than anything we'd been issued before. Adam entered the access codes, and the lockers opened, revealing the weapons and gear we'd been denied until now. The first thing that caught my eye was the Resonant Energy Disruptor, or RED. It looked like a shoulder-mounted cannon, with an array of emitters designed to project low-frequency pulses. The specs on the display indicated it could destabilize the anomaly's molecular cohesion, forcing it into a dormant state for short periods, perfect for crowd control against the spawns. Next were the thermoplasma lances, compact weapons resembling spears with glowing tips. They generated extreme heat localized to the point of contact, ideal for severing the anomaly's limbs and rooting structures without causing runaway growth. The nanite deconstruction grenades were small, unassuming orbs that packed a deadly punch. When activated, they released programmable nanites designed to break down the anomaly's tissue into inert material. Limited range, but devastatingly effective. Finally, we replaced our standard hazard suits with advanced containment suits. These were bulkier, but came equipped with reinforced plating, enhanced filtration systems, and internal reservoirs of BN13, the bio-neutralizing compound. The suits also had integrated HUDs with real-time analysis of the anomaly's behavior. We spent the next hour familiarizing ourselves with the new gear. Adam tested the RED, adjusting the energy output until it matched the anomaly's known frequency. Marcus practiced maneuvering with the lance, its superheated tip leaving faint scorch marks on the armory floor. Jack examined the nanite grenades, muttering calculations under his breath as he calibrated their activation timers. Even Reggie seemed impressed with the upgrades, though he didn't say much. By the time we were ready, the tension in the room had shifted. We weren't just janitors anymore. We were armed for war. As we rode the elevator back down to Sector D, I looked at my team. They were battered, but determined. This time, we weren't walking into the unknown. We knew what we were up against, and we had the tools to fight it. The elevator doors opened, and the hot zone greeted us with the same silence as before, but this time, we weren't just here to clean up. We were here to finish the job. "Stay sharp," I said, stepping into the corridor. "We're not making the same mistakes twice." The corridor stretched ahead of us, warped and glistening with the anomaly's growth. The walls bulged, as if the facility was straining under the pressure of something alive. My boots squelched against the organic coating on the floor, and my HUD immediately flagged it as hazardous. The advanced suits filtered the air perfectly, but it didn't stop me from tasting the bile rising in my throat. The spawns didn't wait long to test us. The first attack came as we turned a corner into a larger chamber. Several spawns detached themselves from the structure, their translucent forms rippling as they scuttled toward us on malformed limbs. They moved faster than before, their bodies denser and more defined. "Reggie, light them up," I ordered. He didn't hesitate. The red fired with a low, throbbing pulse, the emitters glowing a dull orange as they discharged waves of resonant energy. The spawns shuddered violently, their forms destabilizing as the pulses hit. One of them collapsed into a gelatinous heap, its appendages liquefying into a pool of inert matter. The others faltered but didn't retreat. Reggie adjusted the red's output and fired another pulse. This time, the remaining spawns crumpled, their structures collapsing as the disruptor's frequency tore through their cohesion. "Effective enough," Reggie said flatly, lowering the red. "Let's keep moving," I said. "They're just testing us. The main event's still ahead." As we pushed deeper, the anomaly's growth became more aggressive. Thick limbs protruded from the walls and ceiling, some stretching toward us as if testing their range. Marcus took care of them with the lance, its superheated tip slicing through them like a scalpel through flesh. The severed pieces twitched on the floor before going still, releasing puffs of vapor that the suits flagged as non-toxic. Adam tapped my shoulder. "I'm picking up stronger signals ahead. The core should be just beyond this next junction." "Define stronger," Jack said, glancing at him. "Thermal spikes, high-density growth patterns, and something else," Adam replied. "The system can't fully process what it's seeing. Whatever's there, it's big." The junction opened into a cavernous space that wasn't in the blueprints. The anomaly had completely rewritten the space, emptying out the walls and reinforcing them with its organic structures. Veins and ridges formed a lattice across the ceiling, glowing with the same luminescent liquid we'd seen earlier. At the center of the room was the core, a colossal mass of translucent material that radiated heat and light. It was easily 3 times the size it had been when we first encountered it. The core was alive in every sense of the word, and it knew we were there. The moment we stepped in, the structures above us began to move, detaching from the ceiling and forming into dozens of spawns. They dropped to the floor with wet thuds, their forms already solidifying as they moved to surround us. The spawns rushed us in waves, their movements more coordinated than before. Marcus swung his lance, cutting through their ranks as they closed in. Each strike sent parts of their bodies splattering against the walls. Jack hurled a nanite grenade into the densest cluster, the device detonating with a sharp crack. The nanites spread, breaking down the spawns into inert sludge. Reggie aimed the red at the core, firing continuous pulses that made the entire chamber vibrate. The core reacted violently, its surface contracting and expanding as if it were struggling to maintain its form. The appendages above us lashed out, striking the floor and walls in a frenzy. One of them grazed Marcus's exosuit, leaving a deep gouge in the reinforced plating. Another wave of spawns emerged from the far side of the chamber, their bodies larger and more solid than before. I charged, the thermoplasma lance crackling as I drove it into the first spawn's torso. The weapon burned through it instantly, leaving a cauterized hole where its core had been. I pulled the lance free and swung it at the next one, severing its limbs in a single strike. The heat from the weapon radiated through the chamber, forcing the remaining spawns to hesitate. Jack armed a nanite grenade and hurled it directly at the core. The device detonated on impact, the nanites spreading across the surface like a living virus. The core writhed and screamed, not in sound but in motion. Its structure began to collapse, the light inside it flashing erratically. Reggie fired another pulse from the red, the resonant energy amplifying the grenade's effects. The core's surface began to peel away, revealing a dense, blackened mass at its center. It shook violently, sending shockwaves through the chamber that knocked us off our feet. The core collapsed inward, its remaining light extinguished. The appendages above us fell limp, and the spawns that hadn't been destroyed dissolved into pools of inert matter. I felt a sharp tug at my chest, an ache that wasn't physical but no less real. It was over, but the sense of relief I expected didn't come. "Status check," I said, my voice hoarse through the suit's comms. "Intact," Marcus grunted, the servos of his exosuit groaning as he pulled himself upright. His armor was battered, gouged in places where the spawns had gotten too close, but it had held. "All here," Jack added, his tone clipped. He knelt by one of the pools of inert residue, using a gloved hand to scoop up a sample for analysis. "Dead as it gets. Whatever the core was holding them together with, it's gone." Reggie didn't say anything, just hefted the red onto his shoulder and nodded. Adam was still crouched by his console, saving data from the engagement. "Good work," I said. "Let's get topside." We retraced our steps through Sector D. the once living corridors now still and lifeless. The anomaly's death had rippled through the entire area, leaving behind only the scars of its existence. But I knew better than to celebrate. Things like this didn't die clean. There were always pieces left behind. The elevator ride to the upper levels was quiet. My team stood in a ragged line, their postures slouched with exhaustion. When the elevator doors opened, we were greeted by the bright shine of the containment bay. Automated systems sprayed us with layers of decontaminant foam. The jets were colder than I remembered, and the chemical sting seemed to cut through my suit. Once the decontamination cycle ended, we peeled out of our suits, stripping down to the undersuits that clung to our damp skin. The air outside the containment bay felt cleaner, but only just. My lungs ached from the hours of tension, and my body screamed for rest, but there was no time for that yet. We were herded into the debriefing chamber, a cold grey room with a single table and a row of monitors displaying the facility's logo. A faceless operations officer greeted us via video feed, his tone as clinical as the environment. "Team 7 Alpha," he began. "The containment breach in Sector D has been neutralized. Your actions have prevented a potential catastrophic event. You are to be commended." Commended? For what? Surviving a scenario that their recklessness had created? For walking into hell with outdated gear and only half the information we needed? I clenched my fists under the table, keeping my face neutral. "As per standard protocol," the officer continued, "all mission logs and classified data collected during this operation will be archived under Level 5 clearance. You are to refrain from discussing the events of this mission with any unauthorized personnel." The officer moved on. The anomaly, designated Helios Bionet, was part of a classified bioweapons program. Its creation was authorized under Project Directive 14A, with the objective of developing adaptive biological assets for hostile environments. "Bioweapons," Marcus said flatly. "You were making a monster." "Scientific advancements often come with risks," the officer replied, his tone unchanging. "Your role is to contain those risks when they exceed acceptable parameters. This mission was a success. Dismissed." The screen went dark, leaving us alone in the room. No acknowledgement of the lives lost, no answers to the questions burning in my mind. Just another day's work. I sat there for a moment longer, staring at the dead screen. This wasn't the end. Not for us and not for this place. Helios was one experiment among hundreds. Behind every sealed door in this facility there was another anomaly waiting, something else engineered to push limits no one understood. And when, not if, it got loose, we'd be called again. Humanity never stops reaching. There's always another experiment, another risk to take, another threat born of ambition. And there will always be work for people like us.